Okay, good morning. Welcome to our Friday, April 20, 2023 State Game Commission meeting held here in our Roswell District office. I'd like to start with the roll call, Mr. Secretary.
Vice Chair Lopez,
Here.
Commissioner Clemente,
Here.
Commissioner Faulkner,
Excused.
Commissioner Garcia,
And
Commissioner Salazar Hickey.
Here.
You have a quorum.
okay, thank you, Mr. Secretary. Well, we'll start off reading again with our introduction of our guests along with the commission before you. I am Tirzo Lopez, the current vice chair of the State Game Commission, and I'll go to my left. We'll go around the room.
Ed Garcia, new member to the commission.
Sharon Salazar Hickey, Commissioner.
Fernando Clemente, new commissioner.
Morning, commission, members of the public, Stuart Wiley, Chief of Wildlife.
Linda Prestover, representing a veterans organization calling outdoor activities. We were presently before Vietnam Desert Storm. However, Washington has now added golf war veterans to us. So those with us as BDSB, we're now calling ourselves BDSB GW. So I'm here to make a request and thank you very much for coming down to our area of the country. I'm from Las Cruces.
Good morning, everyone. I'm William Cassell. I'm Deputy General Counsel for the Department of Game and Fish.
Morning, Commissioners. Paul Varela, Chief of Administrative Services. David Hess, retired wildlife biologist, hunter, trapper, Mayhew.
Good morning, Commissioners, members of the public, department staff, Jesse Dubell, Executive Director of the New Mexico Wildlife Federation. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. I'm Ben Murray, New Mexico Wildlife Federation. Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Kirk Patton, Chief of Fisheries for the department.
Good morning, Commissioners, citizens, staff.
I'm Mark Matini. I am from Pueblo in Cibola County, and now I am the Northwest. This is really Northwest Regional Representative for New Mexico Behavior. I don't usually have this problem. BHA. Thank you.
I'm Marilyn with you, the guest from Colorado.
Morning, Commissioners. Matt Wonder, Chief of Ecological Environmental Planning Division, NMAC.
Good morning, Commissioners, members of the public. I'm Tim Simbel. I'm the Colonel for Field Operations.
Morning, Commissioners, Major Brady, Southeast Area Captain.
Good morning, Commissioners. Colin Duff. I'm the Southern Major of Field Operations.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to be in Roswell. I'm Sarah Gonzalez, Marketing, Department of Game and Fish.
Morning, my name is Melissa Garnett, and I'm the new PIO for the Southeast region.
Morning, Commissioners. Good morning, attendees. I'm Ryan Darr, the Assistant Chief of Information for Game and Fish. And I will note once these two introduce themselves that we do have one virtual attendee that we'd like to introduce.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Tristiana Bickford-Carroll. I'm the Assistant Chief of Education for the Department of Game and Fish.
Morning, Commission, members of the public. I'm James Pittman. I'm the Chief of the Information Education Division with Game and Fish.
Good morning. My name is Joseph Dworak. I'm a Deputy Attorney General from the Office of the Attorney General, providing legal counsel to the Infinite Commission today.
Good morning and welcome to Commissioners. I'm Mike Sloan, the Director of the agency.
Okay, thank you for the introductions. Move on to item 4 of our agenda, the approval of the agenda. Is there any amendment you suggest be made to the agenda? Hopefully, if we're out here before noon, we won't have to take a lunch break. So let's see. So is there a motion to approve the agenda?
I so move.
I second.
Okay, by Commissioner Arredondo. All those in favor? Aye. Motion is approved. Okay, we're on to item number 5, the election of chair and vice chair. And being in the interest of transparency, with the state of New Mexico, we are missing a member today who has had a family emergency over the last 18 hours. That's Commissioner Greg Fulker. So I will turn it to the commission as to see what they would like to do. Would you feel having the election today, or postponing to our next meeting, or having a special meeting?
Thank you, Vice Chair. I recommend that we postpone to our next meeting. A special meeting would be just fine. I think in fairness to the commission, particularly the new commissioners, having you lead us as vice chair, as you have these past several months, if it's not an imposition on you, it would be good to have you continue as in a leadership role, vice chair. And then when Commissioner Fulker is available, we can have a meeting, you know, in our an election, a vote at our next meeting, unless there's new business that you feel other than that we need to have the special. But I recommend we not take the election and the vote today.
Commissioner Pimentel.
I will support the decision. I mean, it is fine. It is for respect of the commissioner that is not here. So I will support that.
Commissioner Garcia.
I'm fine. Because I'm never having special election prior to whatever the other commissioners.
Yeah. So we will remove item number 5 from the agenda of the election of chair and vice chair, and postpone to either a special meeting is called or the next meeting.
For the record, I think that's agenda item number 7.
Yeah, so I guess I should take this moment to apologize for 1, 2, 3, 4, 7.
Oh.
The cut, surge of cut and paste, I apologize. Yes, it's item number 7, but it's
I think
5 and 6 9.
Is there a motion to postpone the election of chair and vice chair for either a special meeting or at the next meeting?
So I'm gonna go ahead and move with the motion to go ahead and postpone the election of the chair and vice chair, and go ahead and request a special meeting for this decision.
I second.
Mr. Secretary, would you call the vote, please?
Commissioner Salazar,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Wolfman is excused, Commissioner Clemente,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lopez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, members of the commission, and we will get this addressed ASAP. Okay, we'll go on to our next agenda item, the consent agenda. You've had the commissioners, you've had to review the consent agenda. Is there an approval? Any questions on the minutes of our last meeting? And any questions on the revocations?
And for the record, the consent agenda is approval of the minutes and the revocations, and I want to commend the Department of Game and Fish for the due diligence that they really prepared those revocations. Thank you, Vice Chair. Well, I hereby move.
I do have a amendment.
Oh, yes, okay.
Colonel Simmel, are you available real quick?
Sir.
So Commissioner, if you look at the revocation list of what we have in front of us provided by the Office of Field Operations, you see several violations that have occurred in the field by hunters and anglers alike, as well as the PRA, the Parental Responsibility Act, for failure to pay funds for child support that the department enforces through the Human Services Division. I do have some questions regarding two of the individuals listed on the revocation list of Group 1. And the first one will be the individual that first initial J, last initial A. Just a quick synopsis of the, can you provide a quick synopsis of this case?
Yes. So this was a, that one. This is a 2021 case, and what resulted is multiple counts. Let me get to it here. Where 2 search warrants were served and multiple seizures occurred, including some bobcats which were unlawfully killed. I believe there were some bobcat kittens involved in that were unlawfully killed, and seized from the residence for multiple wildlife parts, including some deer heads and I believe an elk head as well. This one had quite a few seizures in it and quite a few charges. I think total like about 21 total violations.
And can you also look at the case of first initial F, last initial G, with the several angling violations?
Yes, so this individual has quite a history, starting in 2020 and then again in 21, again in 21, 22, multiple times, but getting caught for fishing without a license and then continuing to get caught without fishing or without a license, including being revoked twice and still caught fishing without a license.
Members of the commission, I looked at these two cases and I had a meeting this morning with Colonel Symbol. You see that there's a pattern in these two cases. They continue to violate the law even when they are caught. The first case that was brought to attention is that egregious with the wanton disregard of even killing small kittens for profiteering, possibly. And I believe that the commission shall increase the first case of JA recommendation is 3 years, we increase that to 5 years. All privileges of the department. And the second case of FG increase that from 3 years to 6 years revocation. Reason being that we have hunters and anglers in this state who pay their fees. We just had the draw. Numerous applicants applied, 280,000 plus, 61,000 were granted a license. And these are funding the department and protecting the wildlife, which we are in charge of based on the North American model. And we have several individuals here who refuse to follow those ideals of protecting our and investing in simply purchasing a simple license to fish 3 times in a row. And I hope that we can increase those fees. I'm sorry, those revocations from 3 to 5 years on client, I'm sorry, violator JA, and from 3 to 6 years of client of violator FG. Is there a motion?
Before we move to a motion, I'd like some more discussion on what you recommended. And thank you, Vice Chair. I guess this is a question for legal counsel here, but I thought the material that's presented to the commission is public information. It could be releasable under IFRA. Is that correct, council?
Chairman, members of the commission, that's my understanding, unless there's an exception that was provided by statute, but I'm not aware of those.
I don't think so either. And I think, Vice Chair, I think that with due respect that you're extending here, I'm not, I don't have a problem with you saying the names. So for the record, may I state their names?
You may state the names.
Is there a reason why you did not want to state them?
I would just state the names that we are in a public setting and there is people watching. And if they want to execute an IFRA request, we just find the names, they have that right. But I believe that we don't have to say the names of the alleged violators or the violators in a public setting. If the public wanted to find out the names, they can simply file an IFRA request following state action. The department would more than likely give that information if they request.
Mr. Vice Chair, Director Sloan, have the practices of this commission been to state names in this discussion?
Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioner, I think generally speaking, yes.
So I'm going to go ahead and state the names, particularly the new commissioners, because I want to make sure that we're all looking at the same material. JA's Jason Adams, and the FG is Fernando Gomez. And I thank you, Vice Chair, for your due diligence, because when I was looking at material, I tend to rely heavily on the commission department's recommendations. And the red flags that you noted, I did not see in this material. And so how did you, other than knowing and having a private meeting with the Colonel Jim Simple before, how is it that you were flagging these? Because in material, I didn't have flagged them.
Based on what was presented by the department, it was clear the list of violations that have occurred. When you list the number of counts, for example, 3 counts of fishing without a license, and then 2 more counts of fishing without a license upon revocation of rights to fish, was a big red flag. And then, of course, the unlawful taking possession of animal parts in the field, unlawful possession of big game out of season, and then consulting with the Colonel Field Operation, you're able to dig deeper into the case file presented by the officer, and you find out how much more egregious it is in reading the hard work and reports that the officer put together.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Colonel Tim Simple, you originally recommended for years. Do you have a problem with going forward with more?
I don't have a problem. You're more than welcome to do what you would like to. I will just point out for Fernando Gomez, his, whether it's 3 or their proposed 6 year revocation, currently he has a penalty assessment that he has not paid. So that time will not start until he pays, because he's already revoked until he pays it. So if it takes him a year or 2 to pay it, that's when his clock will start for your 3 or 6 years.
Well, it seems to me that the more we talk, it's yes, right? Yeah, I think I'm a firm believer that some people, they take one of the more precious resources from the residents of the state of New Mexico, right? And a lot of people, they do what it needs to be done to be able to do it legally. And so if it's okay, Vice Chair, I would like to make a motion that we go ahead and proceed with the recommendation, which is with the individual, I'm sorry. Go ahead and move with Jason Adams on correct from 3 years to 5 years. The revocation, and from Fernando Gomez moving from 3 years to 6 years.
Do we have a motion? Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Secretary, would you call the vote, please?
Commissioner Salazar Hickey.
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia. Yes. Commissioner Clemente.
Yes.
Vice Chair Lopez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you, commissioners and Colonel Temple for your input and subject matter expert advice.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Okay, we'll go on to agenda items.
Mr. Vice Chair, I think we still need to.
Oh, yes.
Motion for the minutes.
And yes, we do have a motion to approve the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes of January 23rd? Have you all reviewed the minutes of the last meeting? Or if there's any questions?
I will make a motion to approve the minutes.
Is there a second? Second. Mr. Secretary, would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Salazar Hickey,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia. Yes. Commissioner Clemente,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lopez,
Yes.
motion passes.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. So let's do, our favorite part of the commission here is hearing from, the stakeholders around the state, as well as the employees, licensed buyers, all parties involved. We're gonna have general public comments. If you feel you need to make a comment, still a card, you can hand those to our lovely staff there, and we'll get you squared away. We'll limit public comments to 3 minutes. I believe that our practice is. Staff will have to keep a time limit for that. And we have one comment so far, and that is from Len
Hello, Presto.
Lopresto. We want to come to the mic first, right here at the podium, and
See, we on here? Thank you. My name is Len Presto. Before I get to the immediate point of what I want, the request I'm going to make, my background is a computer application programmer, and most of my work in the past has been, well, of course, with areas of military and with law enforcement. So what I'm about to say, I have in my database at home information, should you need it, we go find it. I'm going to make a request that when using power bait in New Mexico, that the smallest size boat should be a number 8. I say this based on going around New Mexico. I fish 4 days a week, usually Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and then I do computer stuff on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I've noticed that when you use a hook smaller with power bait, the fish swallow the hook, and it's almost impossible to remove the hook without injuring the fish. They in turn die. If the fish is small, they just throw it back in. So if the warden shows up, it doesn't count near total number of fish caught. This is primarily the trout species or salmon species. And that is the primary reason. Now I've done studies on distal peats. It is rare they swallow that. All of our fly fishermen, it is extremely rare to swallow flies. In fact, the percentage is around 7.5. So this happens everywhere. I have also consulted on this matter with game wardens and biologists from the states of Idaho, Kansas, Maine, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Dakota, and West Virginia. And they also feel that way they would adopt it there. In the state of Colorado, if you have a high altitude lake that requires stocking by an aircraft of some sort, they're going to outlaw power bait entirely. And that is it. I just would like to make that request. You know, that's it. I have 70 active veterans who fish every week. I have a total of 700 in my database. We've been unable to assemble every summer due to COVID. Hopefully this summer we'll be able to assemble again. I want to say that the newspapers in New Mexico have been fantastic. When I made a request, they've all printed it, including the Roswell Daily Record. I want to thank you for hearing me out. And gentlemen, I wish you the best of luck. One last comment. Working with law enforcement military as I have, you know, we're pretty forthright. We can't be nice. That just can't. So I say this with deep sincerity. I've talked to some of my guys, Mr. Ramirez and Clovis, oddly enough, or Mr. Ramirez in Carlsbad. You guys are the best agency the state has, and we'll stand on that. Thank you very much.
thank you, Mr. Lin. Is there any other public comments at this time?
And we have none online, correct?
Okay. With that being said, we will turn it over now to our agenda item number 10, to Mr. Mike Sloan, to give us the legislative roundup discussion of our last 60-day session, which just ended about a month ago. And the deadline for signing bills was a few weeks ago.
Commissioners, as just said, I'm going to give you a real brief update on kind of what happened at the legislative session. Here's a pretty quick summary, although it was a long, 60-day session, a lot happened, but in the end, kind of here's the outcome. Bills that passed are House Bill 2, which included our budget request as requested, which was a flat budget, but it also included a 6% increase for all state employees. So that's excellent on top of the raises we were able to give our folks last year. That's make a significant difference, I think. It also includes for the first time $7 million in general funds funding for the agency. So that's pretty exciting as well. House Bill 35, which is free cultural services for foster families, allows for foster families to obtain free fishing licenses. We estimate that it's probably about 2,000 licenses for the entire group, so it's not a big impact, but it should make a big difference in getting folks outdoors and enjoying the resources that we do have. House Bill 197 was to increase free fishing days. Currently, I have the authority with the Commission's approval to allow two free fishing days, non-consecutive. That was changed to 2 weekends, non-consecutive. Later in the agenda, we have the opening of the fish rule to change the structure of that. Create Wildlife Corridors Fund. You know, several years ago, there was a bill to create a wildlife corridors plans for DOT to reduce vehicle wildlife collisions. That plan had no funding, but there's a bunch of federal money that's become available, so they were able to get about $5 million, I think, into that fund to match the federal funds. So we'll be seeing some work. I think our top priority project is just north of Cuba on 550. SB 9, create the Legacy Permanent Fund. Was funded with $100 million, $50 million in endowment, and $50 million in a fund that will be expended over the next 4 years. That will lead to the department starting not this July, but a year from this July, receiving $2.7 million funding for largely to be used for species of greatest conservation need. That was a big lift by Senators Bill and Word. But it was successful in getting through the session. And it also will fund energy and minerals, Mexico Department of Agriculture, cultural affairs, and various programs that exist in those agencies. And finally, SB 392 as game and fish outdoor use programs. It was a bill developed by a young man in this part of the state who wanted to ensure that young people across the state had the opportunity to participate in conservation activities. So that bill specifies that we'll have conservation education opportunities in each of the 5 commission districts, as well as creates a requirement for us to have, when you go in to buy a license, there'll be a button you can push to donate to specifically youth programs. So, that's bills that failed. House Bill 183 was going to transfer the Department of Game and Fish and the Commission to be a division under the Energy and Minerals Natural Resources. It would make the Commission advisory rather than rulemaking, and replace all of the rulemaking authority with the director who would report to the Secretary. That bill didn't make it through its first committee. House Bill 184 Commission changes. That was going to change who appointed commissioners. There was 3, the governor would only appoint 3, and the legislative council would appoint 4. What county didn't have more than 2 from the same county, 2 other restrictions. That one didn't make it through the governor. House Bill 261 to expand unlawful taking of big game. That was a bill put forward by the Wildlife Federation. It started to move and then they ran out of time. House Bill 486, the Game and Fish Mission and Fees, was a bill that wanted to change what the agency does, what authority the commission would have over the species, so allow the commission to take authority for various, any species, at their discretion. And then they rolled into that fee increase for licenses. It did not come with any funding, so it became a discussion of, this is really RAWA, focused on RAWA, which is a $36 million undertaking, but there wasn't any additional funding. And I think that's largely why that bill didn't make it very far. Senate Bill 225, hunter safety training for filmmaking, was an effort to require all filmmaking employees at any site to have hunter safety training. The issue with that was really that hunter safety is about not shooting at people and not shooting at airplanes and that kind of stuff, and that's what they do in movies, so it wasn't a really good fit. SB 254, game and fish licensing fees, was our bill. We made it through the Senate to two committees and then the Senate floor over to the House side, and the chair of the House Energy and Environment and Natural Resources Committee didn't want to hear it.
Who was the chair?
Representative. So that bill died in that committee. And lastly, SB 439, legislative approval for certain land purchases. There's a bill put forward late in the session saying that the commission currently has authority to purchase land without legislative authority, although the budget to purchase that land is required to be approved by the legislature. But this bill would have limited the ability for the commission to purchase land without specific legislative authority to $1 million. We made it through the Senate calendar, but never got onto the Senate floor for a vote and never got over the House. That has stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Is there any questions from the commission for the director?
Mr. Vice Chair, and thank you, Director Sloan and Department. And actually, I want to do a shout out to members of the public. I see a number of people here who were very involved during the legislative session. And Director, I know that you and Chief Stuart Wiley were very active there, and members of the public. Well, very good. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to see the public reaching out, either their hands-on at the legislature, in the governor's office, or in the newspapers, in your websites, etc. I think the success of our country, our systems rely very heavily on involvement. And nothing in life is black and white. If we all sing the same tune, it will not be good. And so, Mr. Where everybody that I just mentioned was always available, so it was very nice to see this legislature. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioner, thank you for pointing that out. We did have a great deal of support from a number of organizations, both in the room and not here today, and we really appreciate that. As you say, we weren't always on the same page, but when we were, it was very positive.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Director. We'll go on to our next item agenda. And this is a non-action item like the one before. It will be our Fisheries Management Division 2022. And then this will be Dr. Kurt Pack.
Okay, good morning, Madam Chair. Goodness gracious, you thought I've been here in a while. Good morning, Mr. Vice Chair and Commissioners. Yes, I've been used to a long tenure of Commissioner Salazar Henry being the chair. So In January of this year, I was supposed to be a part of a group of people presenting, the department's accomplishments, and I had a conflict come up that kept me from making that meeting. So thanks for accommodating my schedule and letting Fisheries present our updates for the year. If I had to summarize 2022 in one word for our division, it would be fires. As you know, in about this time last year, we had two large catastrophic wildfires burning in northern New Mexico, another small one over in the Hemis, and then later in the season, those two large fires merged, and then there was another fire in the Gila. Nonetheless, we spent a significant amount of time adapting our scope of work this past year to responding to the fires and the challenges that they pose for us. What was different this year, in previous years, we've dealt with watersheds and flooding and the ash flow that comes down. This time it also affected our hatcheries. And beginning earlier in the season, we were contacted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and they were going to have to evacuate the Moore National Fish Hatchery where Gila trout are raised. And so we took about 2,500 Gila trout into our Red River hatchery, and it was a great example of federal state partnership and our crew up there adapting their work plan to accommodate those requests. We also had to evacuate Los Boas Springs hatchery, so our staff had to evacuate at one point in the season. It was about a week and a half. We had to accommodate additional housing accommodations and make plans for catastrophic power losses if they needed to choose, or if they needed to cut the power to the hatchery. Throughout this whole season, our biologists and hatchery staff were working to divert fish from closed waters on Carson National Forest as well as Santa Fe National Forest and adjust our inventory so we didn't have a stacking up of fish and fish health issues because we had too many fish in the system because we couldn't stock. As I mentioned previously, we also had the black fire down in the Gila where we worked with Fish and Wildlife Service and the Forest Service to evacuate Gila trout from a couple areas as well as Chihuahua chub from the members drainage. So this is just a quick map to show the trips that some of our native trout went on this year or last year as a result of the fires and the rescue efforts that we participated in. And one point about all of this is anytime you have a fire, we've learned it's best to coordinate early and often with the incident command team to make sure that they can accommodate our resource requests and we don't create any safety issues for our crews or theirs. But just for example, and this is a multi-agency, and we actually got New Mexico State in the room on this one. We started off with Rito Morphe. We had a small population of Rio Grande cutthroat trout there that were threatened by the fire. We actually took them down to New Mexico State and housed them in an isolation unit for about 6 months. And while we prepped a stream to receive those fish, we also removed Rio Grande cuts from Alamitos Creek. They were temporarily housed at Seven Springs Hatchery, our cutthroat facility. Ultimately, they went into Turner Creek up on Maple Park Ranch and Walking Creek over by Los Alamos. And then finally, we were able to get into the upper Pecos drainage to rescue fish out of Rio Valdez, and they are still at Seven Springs Creek. And we hope to spawn those fish to start a Pecos food stock for your drainage. So on top of all the extra work we got resulting from the fires, we also had to do our normal jobs. It was a pretty successful year. Starting off with, we continued on monitoring and continuing with some aquatic habitat improvements. Some of you might be familiar with Rio Chama habitat improvements that we did below Abiquiu Reservoir right before the pandemic. We did our first surveys this year. We're starting to see, if you can see my cursor, we're starting to see some rainbow trout persist longer. These blue bars are the after habitat work, but we're also starting to see some quality and trophy size fish in that reach, which we haven't seen there before. As well, we're also after the habitat restoration, we're starting to see larger quality size brown trout in that reach. So it's a good example of aquatic habitat work on federal lands that we're seeing the benefit for the fishery. We continue to work with the city of Carlsbad to improve some urban lakes down in particular Carlsbad Municipal with some habitat structures. And then we put the final touches on this Chihuahua Chub Refuge Pond. We had some challenges with the well and how it was working properly. And finally, we were able to take fish from the Members River, that being Chihuahua chub, which was threatened by the fire, and use this refuge pond exactly what it was designed for, and that's for refuge purposes. We continued on with a pretty robust fisheries research efforts. These are just a couple of examples. We've been for years surveying species of greatest conservation needs, such as Rio Grande chub. This is a genetic structure plot of different populations of that species across the state, and we're working with federal and university researchers to give us a better understanding of what is the population structure and how can we best use those populations to restore that species to other parts of the state. We started a largemouth bass stocking effectiveness study at 3 of our smaller water bodies. Essentially, we've been stocking them for years now. We get a better understanding of is our stocking working to enhance the fishery. And this bottom right corner, I'm really excited about. For the past 5 years, we've been using a new technology, but it's YY brook trout, and I can give a whole presentation on this, but I'm just going to stick to the real basics. It's a way of using a brook trout or YY brook trout to enhance our Rio Grande cutthroat trout restoration efforts. And what this plot shows is that the research is working out that we are seeing a skewing of the sex ratio of brook trout in that stream to all male, which ultimately we're hoping for a population crash, which will enhance the Rio Grande cutthroat trout and ability for survival and overall support our restoration efforts. So we had some significant hatchery improvements over the past year. We finished phase 1 of the Glenwood renovations. If you can see in this picture, that's a new aeration tower, a new production building, new collection box, new recirculation box. And this is a long infiltration gallery that we replaced. This was about a $4 million project, and we were hoping to go out to bid with phase 2 later on this year. We've been seeing an increase in water produced by this infiltrator by about 50%. So we're getting some good water as a result of the renovations. And we're also starting to get into Gila trout production at that facility. We completed the final designs and environment department permitting for the Los Ojos water drinking water system. So we're set to go into construction next or this summer once the new fiscal year starts, as well as we were able to put in a new mobile home at Rock Lake Fish Hatchery. This is just a quick summary of what we stocked last year. It's a typical list with the exception of one additional species. That's the wipers at the bottom end of that table. They are a white bass, striped bass hybrid that we talked about. We talked to you last year. We put a handful of those into Caballo Lake to see if we can enhance the fishing opportunities there. And this bottom right graph is just demonstrating that we continue to get better at producing largemouth bass at Rock Lake Hatchery. We produced about 1.6 million largemouth bass last year, which is a bottom crop for us compared to the prior years. So we're getting better there. We continue to coordinate aquatic invasive species intervention efforts across the state with federal, state, and municipal partners. With our coordination and their contributions, we had a little over 42,000 inspections at different water bodies across the state. That led to 323 decons or hot water decontaminations of boats to ensure that zebra mussel and quagga mussel in particular and other aquatic invasive species are not introduced into the state. And so one of the other significant accomplishments this past year, this is a long time coming, this is a 15-year project. We've completed the last phases of non-native fish removal from the upper Costilla Basin on Carson National Forest and Vermejo Park ranch lands. This is a long-term project. To put this in context, this bottom right picture here is me back when I had a full head of hair and no gray hair. And that's my younger daughter, or my older daughter, when she was 5. She's now a freshman in college. So this has been a long-term commitment by the department and our partners to restoring Rio Grande cutthroat trout, and we're also going to put Rio Grande chub and Rio Grande sucker into that system later on this year. So big accomplishment for our staff to finally have that one done. We are planning a big stocking event on July 1 when the live it all opens. So if you have the time and want to put a Rio Grande cut into the water or Rio Grande cuts in the water, we welcome you to come and join us. With new commissioners on the commission, as well as just giving you guys a heads up, these are just a couple examples of some things that might be coming your way of trends in the fisheries world. We're starting to see some pathogens pop up in different parts of the state. For example, we've had 3 years running of ick at Rock Lake Hatchery. It's a common parasite, and we've never really had that before. But we feel like there's a change in the temperature regime of the pond or the sinkhole that we draw water out of. We have a pipe going down 50 feet, and fish are starting to go deeper in that water. And so we're afraid that that's the source of ick in that water. It affects hatchery production. As I'm sure you've heard about the challenges with whirling disease we've had there at that hatchery as well. But that's 2023, so we'll cover that next year. We also are starting to see Lardia popping up as an external parasite, relatively common. It pops up when water temperatures are high. We saw it at Eagle Nest Lake, one of our best rainbow trout fisheries in the state this year, which is a first that we've seen during my tenure. We're continuing to have challenges with kokanee spawning and kokanee management in the state. We have a special rule where every year we go out and spawn kokanee, stock them, and then when they come back after 3 or 4 years, there's a special spawning snagging season. That is Wildlife Management Division's Marshmaster. It's an amphibious vehicle. Normally we use boats to install our nets. The Heron Lake, our primary broodstock lake, has been so low, we've actually had to go to using an amphibious vehicle to get out to the water. This past year, we couldn't even spawn in Heron Lake. It was so low and the populations were so low. We tried down the lake. So it's just something that other states are dealing with this issue as well. So it's just something to be aware of as you hear about kokanee fishing. We're aware of it. We're working, doing our best, but it's just environmental conditions that are beyond our control. And finally, we're also just seeing some shifting in fish communities, moving in some places from trout to a smallmouth bass, which is more of a cool water species. It's just something to be aware of and keep in mind as we move forward. So that is 2022 in a nutshell. I didn't cover nearly all the things we do, but those are the highlights. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to ask or answer any questions.
Thank you, Chief Patton, for the presentation, and also thank you to all our fisheries staff for all their managing the hatchery, especially now in Santa Rosa with our whirling disease outbreak and how we are managing that. But as we all know, this time of year, fishing is very popular here in New Mexico, and you guys are doing a great job, and we're glad to see that everything's getting stocked. I get the weekly reports that everybody else does throughout the state of stocking and captains of the week, and keep up the good work. So,
Mr. Vice Chair, thank you.
Is there any other questions or comments from the commission?
I have a comment. Representing the southern part of New Mexico, I can bring a thank you for everything that the department is doing. People, kids are very happy around the area of all the opportunities that they have to be able to harvest fish down there. We really appreciate that, especially being in that certain area, right? Area there. There's not that many places to go and fish. So we really appreciate that. With that, what you mentioned that you came out the new parasite, what kind of steps is the department taking to be able to control that?
Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioner Mente, just to make sure I understand, which parasite are you talking about? The whirling disease? Okay. So last week or the week before, we depopulated and euthanized all of the trout that were at Rock Lake Hatchery. So the first step was to get rid of the fish that carried that were carrying that pathogen. And I should point out it was a very low infection rate. I think we do a 60 fish sample, and that's statistically a valid way of testing for it. And it popped up in 1 5-fish plot. So it was a very, very low rate. Once we depopulated, we're letting it sit dry for, I think, close to a month. Then we're going to come in with hydrogen peroxide, which is it's not the best method we can use, but it's an additional tool we could use. Ideally, we could use chlorine or bleach to do this, but our Clean Water Act permit does not allow us to use that, so we'll use an alternative method. Next thing we're going to do is dry it out again, and then we're going to test for the pathogen in different phases of the hatchery. So it's going to be about a 6-month decon process that we're looking at. One downside of taking that long to do that is if your hatchery is out of production capacity at that time. We've already started to make room in other hatcheries to hopefully, if everything goes well, we'll account for the fish that we're not producing at Rock Lake, and we'll have those available for Rock Lake to stock later on this year.
Perfect, thank you. And the reason why I ask that is that if people understand what it takes. It's not another thing. Right?
That is correct. Yes.
Thank you.
Who is the the hatchery manager at Rock Lake?
Mr. Vice Chair, it is Maximiliano Chenorio.
Will you make sure to tell Mr. Chenorio and his staff to keep up the good work?
Mr. Vice Chair, absolutely.
Is there any other questions?
Mr. Vice Chair, I did have just one follow-up. Thank you, Commissioner. That was very good. That was on my mind too, related disease. And related to that, my question is, did you ever find out what the source was?
Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioner Salazar Henry.
No, thank you.
Read the nameplate better. Commissioner Salazar, thank you. The source of whirling disease is difficult to tell. The Rock Lake is, like I said, it's a deep lake where there are not salmonellas or trout that carry the disease or are part of the life cycle of the disease. So I don't think it really came from Rock Lake Hatchery. We bring fish from other hatcheries to rear at Rock Lake. It could be a low-level infection at another hatchery, which would be quite concerning. Alternatively, it could be a bird bringing the pathogen into our Rock Lake and potentially flowing through. There's a whole bunch of different scenarios, and those are additional things that we're looking into.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Vice Chair, I guess I would just add to that we have been doing pretty intensive testing at those other hatcheries and removing fish from them have not had a finding yet.
Mr. Vice Chair, Director Sloan, yes.
Question. And how we test it, and has any of those fish been released from any lakes or any water bodies?
Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioner Clemente, the whirling disease is already present in the wild and in Mexico. It was probably introduced in the 80s through external imports into the state of New Mexico as it spread across the West. So it's already present in New Mexico. It is possible that yes, some positive fish were stocked recently, but in many of the places it's already going to be present. It's already there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chief Patton. We will go on to our next agenda item, which would be the initial discussion of Fisheries Rules 19.31.4.16, and that's the establishment of the free fishing day weekends in New Mexico, which was sponsored and carried through by Representative Doreen Gallegos and found by the executive just a few weeks ago in Santa Cruz.
Mr. Vice Chair and Commissioners, yes, thank you. So the next agenda item is just intended to start the discussion process for amending the fisheries rule related to free fishing days. As you just stated, House Bill 197 amended Chapter 17, I believe it's 17-3-17B, wherein we moved from the director having approval to designate 2 non-consecutive days as free fishing days in a given year with commission approval to 2 non-consecutive free fishing weekends. That is currently set up in rule in 19.31.4.16 NMAC, where I believe that the general dates are the first weekend in June and the last weekend in September. And so what we were thinking about is amending the rule to say it would be the first weekend in June rather than just one day. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say? So we will put that up on our public website and then seek public comment on those changes, unless you have any other advice.
I do have one question. Is it possible to put in a rule, the comments to, when we add an additional rule with among the departments, to have the commission decide annually which free fishing days or free fishing weekends can occur, based on, you know, we can fall on different day, but this year it'd be nice if we could add an additional free fishing weekend sometime in the year. We're not going to, hopefully, if we could, make it by the June meeting, by the June free fishing weekend. I don't know if we can based on the timelines, but have an additional free weekend along with the September date.
Mr. Vice Chair, I'm not sure I'm not sure I could answer that as of right now. My understanding is that the statute as is will be that way until June 16th of this year. And so the free fishing day would be that first weekend in June. And I think we can make the rule amendments in time to make the last weekend in September, the free fishing day weekend. I don't know how the statute would read and whether the director would have the authority to do so, to add another weekend to accommodate what the first weekend that didn't happen. Usually we adopt or adapt our stocking schedule to free fishing days, in particular our catfish stocking. And so I think if we were to add an additional weekend, it would create some logistical challenges, not insurmountable, but I think it's really up to the wishes of the commission how you'd like to proceed. But I think it would create some challenges to add an additional.
Mr. Chair, I guess I would also add that I'm not sure that statutorily there's an opportunity to have three free fishing day events or weekend events during the year, which I think is kind of what would be the outcome of where you're headed. Also, we aligned those dates with National Hunting Fishing Week schedule.
And then voting.
And then there's another one, yeah. So that's why we have that specific first weekend in June and the last weekend in September as those dates. So changing it every year. You're welcome to the commission prerogative, but I would recommend that we stick with those, as I think they're generally accepted across the nation this list.
And reason being that, I mean, there will be situations that could arise, that they might need to be changed, climate, holidays, logistics of stocking, whirling disease brings out a different hatchery, transportation of fish. So that's why I figured we would, you know, I'm assuming that, you know, we change drastically from year to year, but at least the flexibility is available if any situation could occur, such as the one, thank God, that we got that extra weekend that we could adjust those later on.
Mr. Vice Chair, and we talked internally about how to best adapt it, and that's why we're having the discussion.
Is there any other discussion from the commissioners regarding the free fishing weekends?
So just for my understanding, what is recommended is to have a free weekend, free fishing day weekend on June, right?
Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Clement, Commissioner Day. What we are proposing is we'll keep the rule in place for June. And so it'll be a free fishing day in June, one day. We will do the amendments to get the free fishing weekend rule in place for the September free fishing weekend. And then from there, it would be part of the fisheries rule and we'll continue on. It'll be a free fishing weekend in first weekend of June next year, 2024. Free fishing weekend, September 2024, continue on from there.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Vice Chair, Chief, good job. Have you had any input from the public on this?
Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioner Salazar Hickey. No, not yet. This is just the initial discussion. Like I said, we're seeking your guidance on what you would, how you would like to proceed. Well, what I'm proposing is we just do as I just described, change the language in the rule just to address it as being a weekend instead of a free fishing day, keeping the same timing. If it's the wishes of the commission to change that timing up or add more flexibility, we're open to your suggestions.
I think we can put both rules on there, or both ideas, I guess. One changing the specific days to weekends, as it stated, and then another rule where there'll be flexibility. See what effectively would include the weekends, but they could be amended annually if need be by the commission. That might not take good, but at least the public can have a choice. That's what we want to see.
One of the things that we have to be very careful is the flexibility word. Okay. If you're going to use flexibility, I believe it has to be specific. What kind of flexibility? Because you're just going to start changing dates because you want to. When you understand how it's paid, and it's better to get them into a set schedule. Now, if it's flexibility on what is the administration on because of stacking, that will be different. But I believe that has to be specified.
Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioner Clemente, I echo what he's saying, 152%, not 150, 152%, in that clarity and specificity must be on the department's website, particularly when we're doing rulemaking processes. And I would guess that the legal counsel would echo that. It's probably better that you just post what's recommended by the department and then invite the public comment to state, as you said, maybe that they may have other suggestions or whatever, and it's usually done in that fashion through the public comment. So my recommendation would be let's just stick to the plan and just post one for the sake of clarity and specificity.
Richard, any other comments? No. Your motion?
No, I agree with Commissioner.
So we'll post the initial rule as discussed now, and then invite public comment if they feel it should be amended in any way.
Mr. Vice Chair, thank you.
Is there any other comments? Okay, then we will go on. Thank you, Chief Pan, for the presentation. We will go on to our ASB Chief, Paul Varela. Rule number 13. Approval of the FY24 infrastructure capital improvement plan. Chief Varela.
Vice Chair, Commissioners, agenda item 13 is seeking approval for the department for fiscal year 2025 through fiscal year 2029 for the infrastructure and capital improvement plan. Each year, the department is responsible for submitting a 5-year capital improvement plan to the Capital Outlay Bureau on July 1st of each year. Please keep in mind that this is separate from our operating budget request. Fiscal year 25 capital improvement plan focuses on wildlife habitat restoration and management projects, and also off-highway vehicle recreation development and improvement projects. The following 4 years for FY 26 and FY 29 are anticipated projects that the department is planning. However, the most important year is fiscal year 2025, which will be approved at this commission. If these capital projects are approved, each project is available to each department to spend within 4 years. Start with fiscal year 2025. The department is seeking $7 million in total funding. 6.5 million of that is from 3 funds, including the Big Game Enhancement Fund for $2 million, the Habitat Management Fund for $2 million, and 2.5 million from the Sykes Act Fund. These are for wildlife habitat restoration and management projects, which is to improve and enhance areas throughout the state it consists of wildlife, watershed management, and also prevent catastrophic wildfires. The second project is 500,000 from OHV fund, or the Trail Safety Fund, and this is for the development and recreational vehicle improvement projects. The fiscal year 2026 capital plan consists of 3 projects, which total 6.5 million. The first project is $2 million from the Game Protection Fund, which would help to improve rock lake hatchery and ponds at Rock Lake, which Chief Pat discussed previously. The second project is $4 million from the Game Protection Fund, which would be to possibly construct a new area office either in the northeast area of the state or the southwest area of the state. The third project is 500,000 from the Bond Interest and Retirement Fund. And this is for the infrastructure and maintenance of commission-owned properties, which is generally spent on hatcheries. Fiscal year 2027, the department anticipates 1 project, again for wildlife habitat restoration and management. This total amount is 3.5 million. 1 million from the Big Game Enhancement Fund, 1 million from the Habitat Management Fund, and 1.5 million from the Sykes Act Fund. Fiscal year 2028, the department is requesting 2 projects again. 1.5 million, that is the total. 1 million from the Habitat Management Fund for wildlife habitat and restoration management projects, again for prevention of catastrophic wildfires and to improve watershed health. The second project is for hatchery improvements from the Bond Interest and Retirement Fund. Fiscal year 2029 is again for 2 projects. Totaling 3.5 million, 3 million from, or 1 million from the Big Game Enhancement Fund, and 2 million from the Sykes Act Fund, again for wildlife habitat and restoration management projects. We generally tend to keep the description broad so that we can use it on various projects throughout the year, throughout the scope of the capital life. The second project is again hatchery improvements from the Bond Interest and Retirement Fund. This last slide is just a little bit of background about the fiscal year 2025 operating budget request, which we agreed to the commission in August, the August commission meeting. The department is statutorily required to submit the operating budget request on September 1st to the Department of Finance and to the Legislative Finance Committee, which will be approved later on throughout the year through the legislative process. And with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Chief Varela. Is there any questions from the commission for Chief Varela about any of the funding budget items or projects that we before us today?
The proposal budgets that were requested right now, yes, you're right. It is very broad. When I be honest with you, I just don't see why not add up all of them and say 7 million for the same thing, right? I would like to see a little bit more of what the plan is, where is the money intended to go. This is very broad to me. Maybe the commission is used to this. For me to understand a little bit better, on why it's $7 million is going.
Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioner, I would ask maybe Stuart Riley to come up. He's generally the one that's spending the Habitat Management Fund money and the Sykes Act money, and big game enhancement money. So I think that would cover a lot of these larger projects, and I think we have a pretty good explanation for where it's going and why it needs to be brought.
Yeah, Mr. Vice Chair, Commissioner Clemente. So it is very broad. Part of it is those are specific funds that are what they call restricted funds. They're state restricted funds that can only be spent on specific items. And so, for example, in the Sykes Act money, it's associated with our Habitat Stamping program. We have a committee that then determines how those funds get put on the ground that make recommendations for that. So it just sets up the funding for it. And then that committee then goes through and determines and ranks projects and puts forth ideas on projects for how that spending comes about. This is just a way of transferring money. So in a normal budgetary process, we get an operating budget that would last 1 year, from July 1 to June 30th. When it goes into a capital, it goes into a 4-year process. So that money is available for 4 years. It allows for, on these habitat projects, like last year when we had forest closure, wildfires, et cetera, it allows for those projects to carry over from multiple fiscal years, because we were not doing any on the ground habitat enhancement work last year because of that. If it was in the annual budgetary process, it would have reverted back to the fund and we'd have to go back and get legislative approval again. So this is a way when we put it into capital that allows us to stretch it through the 4 years while we build projects with our advisory committees, et cetera. Some of the other funds in the HAMA fund, the Habitat Management and Access Validation Fee, that is specific to game commission properties. That money is only spent on game commission properties, and the projects like Kurt mentioned, some of the fisheries projects that have already been kind of approved as we'll put some of that money towards that. Or for example, a newer acquisition that we have, the Elbar, the commission purchased that in the last year. There's a lot of habitat management projects that will be going on there. So there is plans associated with all those, but through the capital projects, it allows us to expend over multiple fiscal years versus the operating. And then the big game enhancement fund, we try to put most of that money. Those are restricted funds as well. It's restricted to us. We auction off one and raffle off one license for elk, deer, bighorn, et cetera. The monies that come out of that program have to be spent exclusively on management projects, either research or habitat projects that benefit that specific species that it comes to. So they are very restricted in the, even though it says wildlife habitat enhancement, it'll be, for example, in the big game enhancement, restricted to the elk habitat management project that we'll work with the Forest Service or BLM, one of those things.
Thank you.
Okay, is there any other question? Is there a motion to accept the presentation and the capital project improvement plan presented by Chief Laredo?
I hereby move the approval of the FY24 infrastructure capital improvement plan as presented by Chief Paul Laredo.
I will second.
Vice Chair, this should be fiscal year 2025.
25, you are correct.
Sorry about the typo.
Is there a second? There's motion and second, and Secretary, can you call the vote, please?
Commissioner Salazar Hickey,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Clemente,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lopez.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
Thank you, Chief Laredo and Secretary. Now we'll go to agenda item with our Colonel Field Operation Tim Kimball regarding deserving elk licenses for a fish tracking organization.
Right, this is a fairly short presentation, but this program that we have is I think one of those wonderful programs that we have. So this agenda item is for reserving 2 out licenses for nonprofit wish granting organizations. So the authority to do this, 17.3.13.5 NMSA 1978 directs the State Game Commission to reserve no more than 2 out licenses a year for persons under the age of 21 who have been determined by a physician to have a life-threatening illness and who have been qualified through a nonprofit wish granting organization. So currently we have 6 of these qualifying wish granting organizations. They are the United Special Sportsmen's Alliance, Safari Wish, which is sponsored through the SBI, Safari Club International, Under the Lifetime, Outdoor Dream Foundation, Catch a Dream, Holy Pursuit Foundation. Each of these organizations selects their own applicants, so their own youth hunter, and the applicant by the rule must purchase an elk hunting license. So the department's recommendation for this, we go with those 6 organizations. We just filter through them. So it's 2 a year. So after 3 years, wait, you're up again. So the recommendation would be to award the 2 elk authorizations to the identified groups this license year, which are Catch a Dream and Outdoor Dream Foundation. The license year runs from September 1st, 2023, all the way through December 31st, 2023. They are good for any legal weapon type and any area open to elk hunting. And the bag limit is either sex. And this next slide is a nice one. These are last year's youth hunters that were the recipients of this elk license. We had our conservation officers meet them out in the field, and it was a really rewarding experience on both sides. And with that, I'll take a question.
Is there any question for Colonel Simple? Commissioners?
Mr. Vice Chair, I do have a question. Thank you, Colonel Simple. It is a wonderful program, and it is very heartwarming to see this. My questions are first, will the recipients receive any kind of special training? Do they have to go through the hunter safety? I didn't see anything in the material about.
Sure. Yes, they do. Just like any youth hunter, they have to meet those same requirements. So last year we helped them get through the hunter education course, provided them how to take it basically. Because we do offer the online for individuals at least 10 years of age. So that's what they ended up doing. Because a lot of the time these individuals can be from out of state. You know, this is their Make-A-Wish deal, so they're from all over the nation.
Okay, Mr. Vice Chair and Colonel Simple, I take it that you don't know if some of these applicants or recipients have applied in multiple organizations. I mean, it'd be nice to be able to see them because we're selecting only 2 organizations. Is that correct?
Yes. So the organizations themselves, these nonprofit Make-A-Wish ones, they have to apply through us. And there's certain criteria that has to be met for them to be approved. It started, I think, with 3, and then it graduated to 4, and then we added another 2 recently within the last 3 years.
Well, Mr. Vice Chair and Commissioners, if no one has a question, I will move to accept the department's recommendation and reserve 2 elk licenses for the 2 applicants to be sponsored by the nonprofit with granting organizations or the alternates should the primary individuals not be able to participate in the.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Mr. Chair, I am going to second that motion and as well participate for the comment. Yeah. First, I have a question. There are more organizations that receive TAG, right?
Yes.
Okay. And the reason why I'm saying this, I've been part of this. I've been part of taking kids into this with these tags, and it is very rewarding. It's amazing. Not only that brings a new hunter into this sport but into the hunting industry, but separate from equalize this opportunity of an amazing experience with these kids. And I really hope to see a lot more of this going on because I think it's very, very positive thing for our state.
Commissioner Clemente, I agree.
And
I think we have a motion and a second. Mr. Secretary, would you do the roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Salvatore,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia. Yes. Commissioner Clemente,
yes,
Vice Chair Lopez,
Yes.
motion passes.
Thank you, Colonel Single and Mr. Secretary. Also, like to throw a quick note that the New Mexico Wildlife Federation has a great program for kids, nature meals, correct? And that's kind of headed run by Sarah Candelaria. They actually have many events around the state this year. So look them up on the website. Many events they can get the kids out more involved and start them all young. So we'll go to agenda item number 15, with Stuart and Lively, regarding the migratory bird rule.
Mr. Vice Chair, members of the commission, good morning. I'm going to go through the rule real quick, but for some of the newer commissioners, I'll go through the processes on how we go through rulemaking with the State Game Commission and how, according to we follow state rulemaking act, there is a legislative statute that says how rules shall be developed, made, and voted on. With this particular rule, this is the migratory bird game rule. We do this on an annual basis because we set this rule with the federal government. In order to meet the state rulemaking act, what we do is the policy of the commission is to hear these rules at a minimum of 3 times at 3 separate meetings. We initiate, and we'll get to that in our next rulemaking on Cougar, but we initiate the discussion on rules at our first meeting, kind of discuss potential proposed changes that the department is considering, give some of the biological background a lot of times on why that we're considering X, Y, or Z. And then we follow back up in between that first presentation and the second, we go out to the public typically with what are our proposals, what are we hearing from the public, what are other ideas that come in, and we bring that back to the commission at a second hearing or not a hearing, but a subsequent meeting where we discuss the rule. At that time, we ask the commission typically, all right, this is our final chance in front of the commission to give us recommendations. Is there something else you would like to see? Would you like to see something a little bit different from that? After that meeting, the department goes back out and formally notices the rule according to the State Rule Records Act, or Rulemaking Act, excuse me. What that means is we basically post a final draft of the rules for our website, the Sunshine Portal. We go out to the state records with that. It has to be posted for a minimum of 30 days. Then we come back to the commission at least 30 days later, and we have a rule hearing. At that time, we're really adopting the rule with potentially minor amendments. And minor amendments, it's really the AG is kind of weighed in on what substitute or substantiates the minor amendment or what's a major amendment or a logical outgrowth. If it's something that's a major amendment or something that wasn't a logical outgrowth from the discussions that were had during the rulemaking process, we go back out and have to renotice it if it was something substantial. So if our final hearing, we're really looking at this is what we've kind of come to throughout the whole rulemaking process. It's a little bit of a formality at that point, really. Again, if it's something substantial at the very last meeting, it requires going back out and noticing and going through some of that process. But so we're in the migratory game bird rule, we opened this up in January at the January meeting. So some of you newer commissioners, you didn't hear this, but really what happens is we have to follow federal law as well, because we are discussing migratory game birds that have federal laws that associate with the harvest and taking of them, as well as states. So we could be more restrictive than the federal government if we want to, but we can't be more liberal than the federal government. This is due to the signing of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act and so forth. But we work in conjunction with it through the flyways with Fish and Wildlife Service to determine bag limits, season lengths, etc. They publish them in the federal register, and then we can go off the federal register to develop ours. What that has come about for our seasons is we can look at adjusting start dates and end dates for our migratory birds. We can't go out and specify, we can't go earlier than what the federal government allows or later than what the federal government allows, but we can go shorter periods, etc. And we can only have so many days where we're allowed, they call them exposure days, where harvest could occur. And depending on what flyway we're in, it varies. More exposure days in the Pacific flyway, fewer in the Central. So you'll kind of see as we get into this, some of our dates, it's based off of public comment. It's based off of different periods of freeze out and how birds move from north to south in the state. And then the other thing that we kind of deal with a lot on an annual basis is sandhill cranes. New Mexico is unique in that it winters basically the entirety or the majority of the Rocky Mountain population of sandhill cranes along the Middle Rio Grande Valley and in the Southwest Playas near the Mexican border, with some overflow going into Mexico too. We get an allocation of the number of birds we can harvest every year. So that allocation is determined by the flyways. Each state where the Rocky Mountain population of sandhill crane comes in gets a set number. We can't exceed that number. So we then set draw permits for sandhill crane in our Middle Rio Grande Valley or the Southwest. You as the commission can help us with setting those numbers. We already went out in that first meeting to look at what it was. After this allocation we received this year, we're going to be able to stay at the same numbers of permits we had last year. I'll get to a little bit more details on that in a second. One of the big bird species, duck species that really change in our flyway and affects more of New Mexico is pintail. Pintail winter a lot in the Middle Rio Grande as well as some out on the Pecos River. But pintail are more susceptible to harvest. The bag limit changes more frequently, and that's set again by the federal government. This next year, pintail limits will remain at 1. They've been at 1 for the last about 4 years, but they have gone up to 2 in the past. But that is one of the bigger ones. And then we don't have any proposed changes in any of the duck seasons. We did receive 3 comments during the rulemaking. This typically is not a lot of comments that come into play because we hear this rule every year, some minor adjustments here or there. One of the comments that we did receive that was pertaining to snipe hunting, specifically a small shorebird, is they wanted to see it closed later in the south zone. The problem is we don't have a zone split. I'll get into this in a second. We don't have a zone split for snipe. They do occur more in the north, so we start that season earlier before the water freezes and those birds exit the state. If we were to move it into the later season, we probably would miss some of the harvest because we'd have to move back the start date in order to capture later. And then just comments on crane hunting and structure. Some opposition to crane hunting in general, but it's more on favoring the structure that we had last year. I don't expect you to read the dates, but this is just kind of a brief. This is for the Central Flyway, what we're proposing for the season openers and close. What you'll see in the Central Flyway, we do have a north zone, south zone, and that's to account for the northern half of the state. This is the northeast half of the state, freezing earlier. So we get lakes that freeze, et cetera. The birds move further south. So we start that, you'll see almost 20 days earlier, 21 days earlier than the south zone, but we let the south zone go later. And then the rest of the season dates fall within the federal frameworks. Pacific Flyway, because we have more exposure period, you'll see that we start the seasons a little bit sooner in there. In ducks and geese, it's across the whole, or excuse me, ducks and goose. And then like geese, we kind of do a different zone split as well to account for freezing. And then with sandhill cranes, like I said, our allocation last year was a record allocation that we had, record population number that we counted. The population was down very little this year. It was about the same. Our allocation was about 50 birds less, but we didn't reach our allocation. We don't try to reach the allocation when you stay below it. We think with the number of permits we allowed, we'll still remain below that harvest threshold that we're allowed. So we're not proposing any changes to our draw crane permits that will go online. And so in terms of what you'll see next with this is we'll come to you in July with the rule hearing to adopt the final recommendations with that. This time, this is the department's recommendation. With that, I take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you. Stewart, is there any questions?
No.
Thank you. This is a discussion item. Thank you. Chief Stewart, we'll go on to agenda item number 16, and this will discuss the discussion of the Bear and Cougar rule.
Okay, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the commission, as you mentioned, this is our initial discussion of the Bear and Cougar rule. This rule is a 4-year rule, so we open the rule every 4 years, set season dates and harvest limits every 4 years for that. We are setting this rule is coming open today at this meeting. It would set the seasons for the 2024, 25, 26, and 27 season. So the 2023 season is already set. We did that 4 years ago in 2019, but we're looking at starting the next 4 years, starting in 2024. So our schedule and timeline would be today. We're kind of giving some initial proposed ideas, more on the background on how we set harvest limits for bears and cougars and kind of the biology behind it. Some of our initial recommendations will go out between now and July. We'll have public meetings across the state. We plan to host public meetings in every quadrant of the state to kind of discuss our proposals, get some perspectives from the public, and then come to you in August with the department's final recommendation after we've analyzed all the data that we have, went out to public comment, et cetera. And then we would post that final rule to the website in September, with the commission acting on the rule in October is the time we have set for it. So kind of going into how we determine harvest for bear and cougar, unlike a lot of our other species, deer, elk, et cetera, we draw licenses. So we give opportunities through a draw hunt. Bear and cougar, instead, we have mainly over-the-counter licenses. Anyone can buy a license, but we set a limit, a harvest limit on when, once a limit is reached, we close the season, we close the zones within those seasons to try to account for that's our sustainable harvest rather than trying to draw tags and have it there. So, you know, bears and cougars are more cryptic than some of our species. We can't go fly helicopter surveys to determine, so we look at other methodologies and means to try to determine population status. Historically, and even recently, but more historically, we analyze what makes the best bear habitat, mass counting crops, acorns, et cetera, from our oak, or berries, et cetera. And what you see there in green is what we call primary bear habitat. That's where our best bear habitat in the state is. That kind of yellow, it doesn't show up quite as well, is what we would consider like a secondary habitat. And then the bluish, which really isn't showing up well on that, I apologize, would be edge habitat, where it's kind of more that transition range, not really core habitat. What we did historically, going back into the 2000s-ish, we used to radio color bears and then do recapture. We got a recapture rate. It was a capture-recapture kind of study to try to determine, you know, we maybe caught 10 bears, let's say, and we re-caught 5 of those. So we were estimating we captured 50% of the population. That's how we got a basic estimate of bears in a zone in an area. We manage bears amongst 14 bear management zones across the state. And we would determine the density in our primary habitat from those capture-recaptures from radio collars. It's really time-intensive. Capturing bears that were wise to capture were more difficult, probably underestimated, et cetera. In about 2013, we shifted over to a new methodology. It still required capture-recapture, but it's non-invasive genetic sampling. So we set up some barbed wire snares, small barbed wire catch stations, where we put a lure, a scent lure in the middle of that attracts a bear in. It pulls hair follicles off a bear when it goes in to just smell that, and we could then genotype that individual hair strand to figure out who that bear was, individual. And then we could recapture off of those individual hairs to say, okay, we caught in our originally capture session 100 bears. We came back through and captured 50 of those. And so our recapture rate, we captured about 50% of the population. Density was probably something like 200. Those have really advanced our knowledge and our ability to get at the numbers in the population. Well, about in 2013-14, we were doing that only in primary bear habitat. We've seen bears move around more. And so in 2019, so the last rule cycle when we came to the commission, there was a couple of bear management zones in particular where we thought density was higher. We didn't necessarily have data at the time to say, yes, it was much higher or not. So we didn't increase harvest limits at that time. The commission didn't feel comfortable. We didn't feel comfortable proposing increasing until we had more data to suggest, yes, there is or is not more or a higher density of bears in there. What we've since switched to, and what you're seeing there is the primary bear habitat is that darker color, but we've moved some of our hair snare sites around into secondary and edge habitat. We're finding that definitely bears are moving across there. What that is Bear Management Zone 1 is kind of that north central part of the state from the Jemez to the Colorado border, including Chama. Each one of those kind of light blue circles is a hair snare station, and each one of those building colors is where we collected hair from one of those stations. And I'll get to some of the results on the number of hair we collected, et cetera. We did that in 2019, pretty intensive effort. And then we moved down into Bear Management Zone 10, our largest bear management zone. That's basically the Gila. You'll see the northern end of that is High Town all the way down to the Burro Mountains is around Silver City. So we did that in 2020 and 2021. We've moved now over into Bear Management Zone 7, which is along the Colorado border to the east of Raton, that Johnson Mesa area, trying to get at that. So those results won't be in for this rule cycle, but again, we're just trying to always update our science, update our densities, et cetera. This is some of the preliminary results. This is just the individuals. We'll run the models. So it's a capture, recapture, spatially explicit models trying to explain that bears move across the landscape, we capture them at certain intervals, et cetera, and we'll get at the densities. All this is the raw data in terms of how many sites we ran, how many samples we collected, and how many genotypes we were able to run on unique bears. So in Bear Management Zone 1, again, that's that north central from Los Alamos to the Colorado border. We ran 180 different hair snare sites. We collected over 1,097 samples. That 66% ID rate means that hair went to a full genotype to where you could get to the individual. We are a high UV radiation in New Mexico, so our DNA degrades pretty quick. And so this is much higher than the previous in 2013. They were amplifying about 30% of the samples. We went up and increased our sampling rate to about every other week instead of every other month to try to get at the degradation. You'll see we ID'd 94 individual bears, pretty parity in the sex ratio of males and females. Bear Management Zone 10, like I said, we did it over 2 years, a large zone. We ran approximately about 350 different hair sites, collecting just shy of 2,000 hair samples, identifying 152 bears the first year and 118 unique bears the second year. Those are unique bears. Some of those bears will get their hair 4 times. Some of those bears, we only get them 1 time. And then in last year, we collected 729 samples from 124 sites up in that Johnson Mesa area. Again, the DNA is being run right now, won't be done during this rule cycle, but just kind of looking at it. What I have in the bottom graph, we set our harvest limits for bears at about 10% of the population. We tried to make it, for the most part, we don't want to exceed 10% harvest rate in bears. What you can see here and what these are depicting is, for example, in Bear Management Zone 1 in 2019, that in the parentheticals, that 94 is the number of bears we identified through our hairs, which is 94, and 8 is the number of bears that were, when we ran the DNA of harvested bears, we picked those back up. So just under 10% of those are harvested bears we already ID'd in the field. So we don't actually have a marker on these bears. We don't know those bears. We just have hair samples from them. That same year, we picked up 8 in our harvest. So we were just under 10% of that. You'll see in 2020 and 2020, That's a typo, I apologize on there. We were well under our 10%. Our harvested bears represent well under 10% of the bears we were detecting in the wild in our hairs there. So what our harvest limits, it looks like we definitely our estimates that we use to set harvest limits are working. And in these two areas where we thought we were underestimating bears, it appears that we are. We're running the data right now. I think you're going to see that our density of bears is definitely higher than we've previously predicted in those areas, and we'll come back most likely with some increased harvest limit recommendations for those two zones. Real briefly here, this is just our harvest over the last 4 years. That maximum allowable harvest, again, is that harvest limit we set, statewide harvest limit we set. I'll show you a graphic here in a second on harvest limit by zones, but it's not a goal. We're not trying to reach that number. It's the number that we think above that will be unsustainable. You'll see we're below that every single year. And that includes, we obviously have depredation issues with bears, getting them in homes, et cetera, first, human wildlife conflict, and then others typically, someone reported a dead bear or a roadkill or something like that. But you'll see our average harvest over the last 4 years, or excuse me, mortality over the last 4 years is about 624. 2020 was a higher year. If you remember, in some of those commissioners up here last year when we were doing some rather big game rules, 2020 was the peak of COVID when everyone was home, and we actually saw hunter participation increase significantly during that year. I think that explains some of that higher bear harvest that year, more people going in the field. We also had a higher depredation that year. That's probably because people were home and bears were coming to their house, and versus other years when they were maybe not there. So it just was kind of that's more of an anomaly year than the usual is what you'll see. Other things that we look at to say, are we within sustainable harvest in our bear populations, is kind of looking at the age of harvest. And that's what that graphic on the left is looking at the average age of our males and females at the time of harvest. You'll see it's pretty consistent through time. That goes back about, 10 years. It's a 10-year time interval. It really has not changed much. If anything, we're maybe seeing bears where our concern would be if we were harvesting all 2- and 3-year-old bears. It would mean that they're not surviving as high or maybe over sustainable. So if anything, we're seeing a little bit older age in harvest, which would be suggestive that we're maybe seeing a little bit of an increase in population in some areas, but overall pretty consistent in our age at harvest. The next one is age of primary parity, or the first age at which a female has cubs. Bears are unique that they grow a different, the way we can tell age is through a tooth. We take a tooth sample at the time of harvest from all bear harvests. We send it off and it has rings in it like a tooth, like a tree. So that's how we get age, tooth rings. In females, they also put in a different layer at the time they have a cub. And so we can, from the tooth, we can tell when they first had their cubs. And that's an age of primary parity. What that's looking at is part of it is there was a suspect at the desert Southwest. Age of primary parity was older. So the age at which they first had a cub, because of our dry climates, people thought it'd be older. Some of the radio color data from the 90s, 2000 maybe suggested that. Kind of a small sample size, maybe 50 bears. This is teeth of over 1,000 females now, and it's showing that our age of primary parity, age of first cub production, is about the average for black bears, 4.5 years old. And so that's very good. We don't see any anomalies in there. We're not seeing that age increase to suggest something like females are not reaching body condition to conceive. They conceive and hold it up and have it in hibernation, which is good to see that even during some of our drought years, we actually had that age maybe decrease a little bit, not statistically, but we did see a little bit of decrease. And so they're producing cubs at a younger age, maybe more recently, which is a positive from that perspective. Again, I'm not trying to don't want you guys to memorize this or look at it, but this is our different harvest management zones, bear management zones. We have, like I said, 14 different bear management zones. These are our specific harvest limits set by each management zone. No more than 10% of the population. We range from anywhere from 8% to 12%. The 8% is in zone management 14. That's in the Sandias. We have higher, more depredation and roadkills in there. So we lower the sport harvest to reflect that we have higher other mortality pressures on there. And then in bear management zone 3, we actually go to a 12%. Bear management zone 3 has a very low mortality overall and serves probably as a source of population, and that's why we have a higher sport harvest limit of 12%. The rest of those were set at 10% of the population. The numbers in the parentheticals, as they call it, we have a female supplement. So we set harvest limits on the totality of the population, and then we do a female sublimit. So it's 10% of the total estimated population in that management zone, and then no more than 40% of that should be females within that zone. So those are the two different harvest limits. We close seasons, again, we close a season when we either reach the total harvest. So like, for example, in bear management zone 1, if we reached 158 total bears, the season would close in that. Or if we reached the female sublimit, so if 63 females were harvested, we would close that zone at that time of harvest. Again, we're going through the data right now on those two management zones, 1 and 10, where we did all the new hair stuff to get at the new densities. That will reflect in new harvest limits for those zones once we're finalized the analysis on those, which will happen before you hear this the next commission meeting. And then one other thing we're looking at is a potential management zone adjustment in 5 and 7. That's that Johnson Mesa area. 5 probably serving as a large source for bears going over into 7. We're trying to figure out bear movement across there to suggest it may make more sense to move some of this zone 7 into 5. And we're looking at that from radio collar data, et cetera. And those, if we do shift that, it would create a different harvest limits. Other possible changes we're looking at and proposals we're looking at. We do have some draw hunt licenses on our wildlife management areas. As some of you know, we purchased a large wildlife management area, the Elbar, last year. We had smaller numbers of their licenses on there. We'll propose probably anywhere from 10 to 15 new draw licenses for that new property. And then also what we're looking at is possible change right now on those wildlife management areas where we have elk hunters or deer hunters that draw licenses. They're not allowed to hunt bears when they're in their own lines, even if the zone is open. We're potentially looking at a proposed change that properly licensed deer or elk hunters hunting on those wildlife management areas, if they also are in possession of a deer or excuse me, bear or cougar license, would have the ability to harvest if the zone is still open. At our last 4 years ago when we were doing this, we changed the start dates in bear management zones 12 and 13. That's here in the south central part of the state, in the Sacramento Mountains and up by Ruidoso as well. We moved that start date later. There was some public comment since then has come in that they would like us to move that back to an earlier start date. So we're going to go back out to the public from a biological meaning standpoint. It really doesn't make much of a difference. This is more of kind of a social public hunter will, if you want, on what they would like versus a biological issue. So we don't see any difference in the biology on it, but we'll go back out to the public on that. And then one of the other things we're looking at proposing for both bear and cougar, I mentioned that we close zones on the total harvest or the female supplement harvest. We actually close that harvest down when it reaches 10% of the actual harvest limit to account for a system we used to have on our reporting of harvest. So we have to take into account that a bear or cougar is being reported through an officer or an office. And then we had a system that was a hotline, a call-in hotline. So it had a delay system into it. We're developing with our IT development a real-time reporting requirement now so that we would be able to be updating that immediately. Therefore, we think we can, on that 10% closure within 10% of the total harvest, get rid of that because we'll have more real-time data now. So there's not as much of a lag in that allows us to close the zone when you actually reach the harvest limit. So it's not closing them down early. So for example, the harvest limit might be 10%, but because we're closing it down 10% early, some zones are actually closing at 8 or 7% because of the way the harvest is. Moving on to cougar, it's similar to bear in terms of how we try to estimate. Cougars are harder than bears. We We would really go off estimates on the habitat quality. What you're looking at here is a habitat quality map that goes through and looks at the best habitat down to the poorest. As you can see, that blue being poor, the brighter the color, the better the habitat is. Through research in the West and research here in New Mexico, we apply different densities based off of the habitat type, with that kind of darker orange color coming at our highest density of about 3 to 4 cougars per 100 square kilometers. You know, cougars are a large range long distances. So we estimate in 100 square kilometers all the way down to that blue habitat where we're estimating 0.6 to 0.9 cougars per 100 square kilometers, really low density for example. We've applied those densities across, and that's how we came up with our harvest limits for the different we have 18 separate cougar management zones for cougars versus the 14 management zones there. Since this kind of went into play versus applying a density to a habitat type similar to what we've done in bears, we're moving now to call it a spatially explicit capture recapture model. So it accounts for how lines use home ranges and how home ranges overlap and are dispersed across the landscape. We started this research in 2017. What it requires is radio collaring cougars and then putting out camera arrays to recapture. So the initial capture is us physically capturing, put a radio collar on it. And then the second capture is if they walk by one of these camera arrays. You'll see the triangles on that left picture represents the camera grids, and on the right picture, those represent the circles of the camera grids. The model accounts for the probability of a cougar also walking by a camera. So it takes into a lot of information about how animals move across the landscape, the probability of capturing, et cetera. But it allows us probably a better estimation of cougar density across a given landscape versus applying a set density across a habitat type. We're allowing the animals to tell us. The only issue that probably comes into this is one is very time consuming, trying to capture enough cougars, et cetera. And it is pretty time consuming going through all the pictures. We're talking on those camera sites. Each camera site is a paired camera. So for each one of those, there's 2 cameras. We probably have analyzed close to 2 million photos right now. So you have to go through each photo individually. We do have some AI software that will rule out, is this grass blowing or is there an object in it that you should look at? But we still physically go through each one of those to try to say, 1, is it a cougar, and 2, is it one of our marked cougars? We have that. You'll see in these management zones, we collared 14 lines in B and F in 2018. Zone Q, which is kind of down here into the Sacramentos, into the Guadalupe Mountains, we captured and radio collared 25 lines. And then in J and K, which is over in the Gila, we've captured 34. That study's ongoing. We're putting cameras back out this year. So we'll use this information to help inform our harvest limits, I guess is the biggest thing. We keep trying to up the science as much as possible to try to better inform our models that set the harvest limits. We're in management zone R right now. We have 8 lines collared, and we'll start setting down cameras this summer there. One of the other things that we've moved into working in cooperation with the University of Montana is what's called an integrated population model. So it takes into account all this different data sources that we may have for a population, whether it's radio collar survival data, home range movement data, or tooth data that we have on age at harvest, and it incorporates all the information we have for that population into building back what the population needs to be, or what should have been, in order to see all these different data sources we have. We're using that right now to get at some of our densities, especially in bear management zone B and F up in the north central, so that'd be the Jemez up through, again, Shaman, et cetera. When we ran our spatially explicit model with the cameras, it came back at a much lower density than we thought. It probably is due to our number of radio collared animals. So it's a low number comparatively. I think this IPM that we're running right now will probably show that that population is a little bit higher than what that camera model is predicting. So we'll use this to help inform some of the camera data as well. So just another source of data going into helping to predict what our harvest limits are. Unlike bears, Cougars are a little bit more productive. We harvested about 17% of the estimated population, with no more than 30% of that being the female sublimit. You'll see there, those are our different zones, the harvest limits set for each one of those zones. Again, we're in that B zone, we're running more of our integrated population models. We don't have what the harvest limit will be. Once those get back, we'll have more information. Zone J, that's the Hilo where we're currently working. We'll have more information throughout by the time we come to the summer to try to get at some different densities or higher densities potentially. And then Zone Q as well. That's here that I mentioned down in the Guadalupe up into the Sacramento Mountains. We're running the final models on that to try to get at density. So once we get that, we'll update our harvest limits based off the research of the data that we have there. Real briefly, here's our harvest and also maximum allowed. For the last 4 years, you'll notice in 2019, that harvest was a lot higher. That's a part of a function of that was the old rule cycle. The 580 came in at this current rule cycle that we're in. That's the harvest limit. You'll see there, harvest has remained fairly consistent or mortality harvest. This includes depredation and roadkill, etc. A little bit higher this year. You'll see more zone, and that's a function of probably snow more than anything. Human harvest, sport harvest on cougars is really kind of dependent on success rates of capture. A lot of the higher snow, we see a lot higher rates of harvest. Again, not a huge difference here, but definitely did see this last year with higher snowfall, more consistent snowfall through the north. Those zones closed a little bit sooner, and we had a little bit higher harvest as well. And then again, like I say, we'll come back to you with different harvest limits based off of our research that we've been doing, and then we're evaluating the cougar management zone boundaries. Every single time we do this, we look at the zone boundaries to make sure they make sense, to see if we can change, if we're seeing distribution difference that suggests we should adjust this. So with that, I would take any questions you all may have.
Thank you for the presentation. Is there any questions from the commission?
Thank you for the information. This is amazing work. I'm going to be very honest. Biologist. I really appreciate this. This information is really good. And one of the questions that I have is on the bear population. What is the rate? What is the ratio that you want to achieve between male and female?
Yeah, Vice Chair Lopez, Commissioner Clemente, we're really trying to achieve staying, and I should have mentioned before, we do not allow harvest of females with cubs too. So we protect that kind of reproductive age of females, both on cougars and bears. In terms of the sex ratio, some of that was a little surprising to us to see parity in the sex ratio in our hair snares. I think we have bears limiting a little bit the sex ratio on their own. It's not harvest limiting it. Parity is fine. We'd be concerned if we saw a really skewed to where we had way more males than females. I think that would be a concern. Nothing as a concern when it's at parity, but if we had more females than males, we'd be fine with that biologically. But it's when we get into a sex ratio that's skewed more males than females, we have concern. But parity is something that there's nothing of a concern.
You mentioned there's no harvest with cows, which is increases the recruitment, I guess.
Correct.
And I do notice that everything that you're managing is well within 10% of the population, which is very conservative. And that's something you're going into the mountain lions, and the mountain lions that you're tracking, is that radio telemetry to antenna or to satellite?
Vice Chair Lopez, Commissioner Clemente, that's all through satellite. And so what it is we have radio pods on them that upload to those satellites. We program them depending on how frequent our cameras are out there collecting too. We'll maybe up our points so we can see should we have collected that animal on the camera or not. But we collect about a point every 2 hours, uploads to the satellite about every third day, and then downloads into a computer system that we have that manages all of our location data. Because as you can imagine, with as many cars as we have out there, we're collecting tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of points on an annual basis.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the commission? As this is just a discussion item, the initial discussion for Baron Cougar, Mr. I think you do that you do so well. Thank you so much. We'll go to the general public comments now, agenda item number 17. And we have a few cards back to us. And do we have anybody online? Thanks. So we'll go with our first member, one of our members, Mr. Jesse Bell. We'll get a 3-minute time limit staff will.
Thank you very much, Vice Chair Lopez, Commissioner Jesse Bell here, Executive Director of the Mexico Wildlife Federation. First of all, I'd like to welcome our 2 new commissioners. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to work with Commissioner Garcia and Commissioner Clemente. One thing I'd really like to do is urge this commission to prioritize increased transparency. Originally, this game commission meeting was scheduled for April 21st, I believe, and then was later rescheduled for April 27th, and then later rescheduled for today, April 28th. And to my knowledge, there wasn't a lot of public outreach notifying the public of those schedule changes. I happen to look at the commission website pretty frequently, and so I was up to speed on those changes, but we were Wildlife Federation again, Jesse Bell, I'm the Executive Director of the Mexico Wildlife Federation. We were planning an event in advance of the commission meeting. And so the rescheduling required us to make some additional adjustments regarding some of our other travel plans and accommodations, things like that. So the other thing is, as of earlier this week, and I've been out turkey hunting in spring turkey season, so I took a break so I could be here present with you all. But as of earlier this week, on the commission website, Commissioner Garcia and Commissioner Clemente were not yet listed on the website. I would have really loved the opportunity to reach out to Commissioner Garcia in particular, because I've already got Commissioner Clemente's contact information from a prior relationship, but I would have loved the opportunity to reach out and make an introduction. So increased transparency, I think, is something that the public would really appreciate. And this also translates over to the publishing of the agenda. I recognize, you're required to publish the agenda 3 days prior to the meeting, but I think the public would really appreciate, if possible, and if you know what the agenda might look like, the more advanced notice the public could receive on those things, the better prepared we can be to participate and engage in these commission meetings. So with that, thank you all very much for your work, your dedication to the lands, waters, and wildlife of the state. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Duval. Up next, we have Chuck Tripp.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commissioners. I'm Chuck Tripp, Chairman for New Mexico Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. Yeah, it's nice to see new commissioners here. Hopefully, we can have a great working relationship in the future with you. The other thing I wanted to mention was the youth turkey tags. They go on sale, and if you order them online, they get there to your house here in Roswell anyway, a week after the youth turkey comes. So those OTC tags, if you could get those available earlier online, and that'll help a lot of people out. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tripp. Next one online.
Okay, online we have Mr. John Crenshaw. John, you are allowed to talk. Please unmute your mic.
Okay. Good morning, Commissioners. Thanks for the opportunity to comment. I'm John Crenshaw, Mexico Wildlife Federation, long retired game department employee. I'd like to bring up a critical issue that the Commission Department and we citizens have barely begun to address. We all know the state Supreme Court has unanimously reconfirmed that 1945 decision that the public has a right of recreation in the public water, including where it flows through private land. That new ruling came out a year ago, but we're still adrift. I'm in a sea of uncertainty, defiance, misinformation, and insufficient information. And all of those gaps are important. Some even have the potential for creating landowner-citizen confrontations. For instance, the current fishing proclamation correctly states that under the court's order, quote, all the water courses in the state that can be legally accessed are open for public recreational use, end quote. But what it doesn't do is illustrate what legally accessed is or give any examples of it. And neither does it add the really critical point that the public cannot cross private land to get to or from a stream without landowner permission. Now, meanwhile, two organizations and individuals are unilaterally circulating their own misinterpretations. One example is the claim that a recreationist cannot legally step above the high water mark on private land. That's just wrong, and the Supreme Court decision both times was very clear on that. Also, there are still hundreds of no trespassing signs and virtually impassable barriers across streams throughout New Mexico. Those are preventing citizen access to a public easement and resource. And we hear and see that more are going up in defiance, actually, of the Supreme Court. What we really need is the leadership from that only the you and the government from top to bottom has the authorities and the resources to provide, but what they didn't provide back in 1945. Then the governor, the legislators, attorney general, game commission, game department, and everybody else utterly failed. They should have begun the transition immediately. Instead, they essentially chickened out and ignored it. And that only makes it more contentious and difficult for us now. I know the Federation and other organizations representing sportsmen, paddlers, landowners, and many other stakeholders will all help, but the leadership has to come from the government, including the commission and department, and that's where the responsibilities ultimately lie, and it's incumbent on the government to act. And let's be real clear. The public access to public waters, including where they flow through private land, is inarguably the law in New Mexico, period. The issue is not going to go away this time, and failure to act is not an option. So I'm just saying, put on our big kid britches and go to work, and we'd be happy to work with you, but we do need your help, your leadership, and your authorities to get there. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Crenshaw. Is there any other online attendees?
We have no other online comments.
Any comments from the audience last minute? Okay, with that being said, we are going to go into executive session, close to the public. Is there a motion to return to executive session?
To adjourn to into executive session. There's no section 10-15-1 of the NMSA 1978 to discuss apartment purchase, acquisition or development pursuant to section 10-15-1 NMSA 1978 to discuss training, planning privilege with enacted. And to discuss pursuant to section 10-15-1 NMSA 1978 personal matters. Is there a second?
Second.
Secretary, to call the roll, please.
Commissioner Salazar,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia. Yeah. Commissioner Clemente,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lopez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Thank you. We shall return shortly to motion to the meeting of the clerk. Okay, staff members of the public, we are back from executive session. The time is 1:20 p.m. Friday, the 20th, 2023, April. The commission has adjourned into executive and closed to the public. During the executive session, the commission discussed only the matters specified in its motion to adjourn and took no action as to any matter.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I would also like to note that based on discussion in the executive session, I would like to make a motion that with regard to Santa Fe County record number 22-202, disposition of Fisheries Avenue property in Santa Fe, New Mexico. My motion is that the commission review and extend the lease agreement that we have with the state forestry and that we delegate authority to the director of the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish, to sign on behalf of the state game commission.
Is there any discussion on the motion
Oh, for a second.
or a second? No discussion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Okay, Mr. Secretary, would you take the roll, please?
Commissioner Salazar Hickey,
Yes.
Commissioner Garcia,
Yes.
Commissioner Clemente,
Yes.
Vice Chair Lopez,
Yes.
motion passes.
Okay, and that done, I think, we have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes now. We are adjourned. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ed.